What happens when a regime obsessed with control starts losing grip on the one thing people can't live without? Food.
Food crisis.
The food crisis is worsening.
War in Ukraine could cause global food shortages.
And in the middle of the war, it's a growing food crisis.
The prices for essential products such as milk, potatoes, and butter are rapidly rising in Russia.
Potato prices are soaring in Russia. Russian farmers blame the rising cost of production as factors behind the price surge.
Russia is clearly weaponizing food.
About a quarter of Russians can't afford to buy food.
That's making people nervous.
Russia, once a proud agricultural powerhouse, is now watching its wheat fields wither and its people starve. This isn't just about sanctions or global economics. It's about a poorly managed system that's cracking under its own weight. With grocery prices up 200 to 300% compared to just a few years ago, it's clear that Putin's pursuit of power is costing Russians their next meal. If nothing changes, hunger and starvation might destroy Russia long before Zelensky's drones do. Let's start with something familiar: potatoes. In Russia, potatoes aren't just food, they're part of the culture. As a staple food, they're used in everything from soups, stews, and side dishes. That's why they've always been readily available and affordable to purchase. But over the past year, things have changed for the worse. The price of potatoes has jumped by 167%, and in some regions, they are selling for 3 times what they did last year. And it's not just potatoes. The same goes for bread, milk, vegetables, and just about everything else. Basic commodities have skyrocketed in price, and in other places, just getting the goods is a problem in itself. As shelves are starting to empty, markets are becoming unpredictable. As one week you might find fresh produce, then the next it's gone. That kind of unpredictability is starting to strain households in Russia. The stress is pushing people to stockpile when they can, which only makes the shortages worse. It's a vicious cycle of lack, and it is ravaging Russian stomachs like a plague. Shelves are empty, prices are soaring, and families are skipping meals just to survive. If you think these stories deserve to be seen, hit like and subscribe. It helps push the truth past the propaganda and ensure more people understand what's really happening. So what has caused such a drastic food crisis in a country typically known for its agriculture? Well, several factors have been at play. The first of these is climate change, a phenomenon that has had a big impact on the country's weather system, introducing negative patterns for the agricultural systems there. Russia's southern grain regions are facing longer, hotter droughts that have resulted in the loss of significant produce. At the same time, Siberia has seen more flooding. These extremes aren't just inconvenient, they're damaging. Crops don't grow well in unstable conditions. This is evidenced by how Russia's potato yield has dropped by 12% recently, with wheat and vegetables all seeing lower outputs. That's bad news for farmers. And it's bad news for consumers. Less supply means higher prices. And when those prices rise across the board, it's not just a farming issue, it's a national one that Putin has been forced to admit exists. With climate change now adding a factor of unpredictability to the equation, farming becomes even harder. And when farmers can't rely on the seasons, they lose money. The effect? They plant less, they harvest less, supply goes down, and prices go up. But weather isn't the only issue, and this isn't just a string of bad luck. It's the result of a chain reaction that started with war and sanctions. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the global response was swift. Sanctions hit hard. And while most people think of banks and oil when they hear sanctions, agriculture was affected too. Western countries stopped selling key farming tools, seeds, and fertilizers to Russia. That created a gap that's still being felt. Russia had relied on imported high-yield seeds to boost its crop production. Without them, yields dropped. And without modern farming equipment, farming became slower and less efficient. That's not something you fix overnight. It takes years to rebuild that kind of infrastructure. In the meantime, farmers are doing what they can with what they have, but it's not enough. And it's evident through the drastic increase in farming costs that are rising across the board. These higher costs are pushing many farmers into dangerous financial corners. Loans taken out in better years are now unpayable, as revenue from smaller harvests can't cover expenses. Smaller family-run farms are especially vulnerable, and many are being forced to sell land or shut down altogether. Those properties often end up in the hands of politically connected agribusiness, consolidating control over Russia's food supply into fewer, more powerful hands. This shift might keep some production going, but it also makes the system more rigid and more exposed if those large operations face trouble. This brings us back to a quick side thought. If Russia is an agricultural powerhouse, then it should be ready for such situations, right? This is the part of Russia's food crisis that doesn't get talked about much. And yet, what's happening with the country's grain reserves is a key part of this mess. These reserves are supposed to help in tough times, like when harvests are bad or prices shoot up. Basically, they're supposed to help, like right now. The idea is simple: store grain when there's plenty and release it when people need it. But lately, that's not what seems to be happening. Instead of using the reserves to bring down prices and ease shortages, the government appears to be holding on to them. Some local officials say they've tapped into the reserves to help their regions, but independent reports tell a different story. A lot of that grain is still sitting in storage. Even worse, some of it is being saved for export deals, sold to other countries to bring in money. That might help Russia's economy on paper, but it doesn't help families who are struggling to afford basic food, like bread. This puts the country in a tough spot. If the government keeps the grain locked away, it might protect future supplies and earn foreign cash. But doing that also keeps prices high at home. And right now, that's hurting regular people. Bread prices have gone up, and many families are cutting back on food. In past years, when things got bad, the government released grain to calm the market and show people that they were being looked after. This time, that's not happening, or at least not fast enough. The slow response raises a bigger question. What's really driving these decisions? Is the government more focused on looking strong on the outside to the world than on helping its own people? Under Putin's leadership, there's been a clear shift towards using food as a tool for power. Grain isn't just grain anymore, it's leverage. It's something the Kremlin can use to make deals, pressure other countries, or boost its image. But while that strategy might work with foreign politics, it leaves Russian families paying the price. People are noticing. Farmers, shop owners, and everyday citizens are starting to ask why food is being treated like a bargaining chip instead of a basic need. And it's not just about grain. The whole system feels tilted, more concerned with control and profit than with fairness or care. Putin's government has built a tight grip on the food supply, and that grip is starting to squeeze the wrong people. In the end, food security isn't just about having enough grain in storage, it's about making sure people can eat, afford what they need, and trust that their leaders are looking out for them. Right now, that trust is wearing thin. And unless the government can change course, the crisis won't just be about food, it'll be about leadership as well. Moving forward, another reason why Russia's food prices have surged can be summarized in 3 words: fuel, transport, and war. Firstly, fuel prices have surged this year, with diesel, an essential for farming and freight, up more than 11%. And every extra ruble spent on fuel gets passed down to the shopper. That's why prices are climbing even for items that are grown locally. Refineries are also shutting down due to equipment shortages, and government subsidies meant to stabilize prices have been cut. Farmers and truckers are being squeezed, and when fuel costs rise, every part of the food chain becomes more expensive. That goes for everything from planting crops to delivering them to stores. Even when food is produced, the problems are not over. Moving it across the country is becoming a major challenge, primarily because of Russia's sheer size. Look at this map. You can see why Russia has to rely on its huge rail network for moving goods. However, that very same network is in steep decline. Because of that, freight volumes have dropped for nearly 2 years, and hundreds of thousands of wagons are just sitting idle. Trains are delayed or canceled, and military cargo is being prioritized over civilian goods. That has forced more food to be transported by road, but that's not a good thing because Russia's roads are in poor condition. Many rural highways are crumbling, slowing deliveries and driving up costs. Road transport surged last year, but it is less efficient and far more expensive. On top of these problems, Ukraine's attacks are making things worse. Drone strikes and sabotage have hit fuel tankers, rail lines, and key infrastructure all across Russia. This has disrupted supply chains and delayed deliveries. The result of all of this is what we are seeing now. Food prices are rising fast, and basic staples like potatoes and chicken are becoming unaffordable for many Russians. This is more than just a logistics issue. It's a warning to address these issues while it is still possible to do so. Though we've mostly been talking about grain, the consequences of this crisis aren't only in crop fields. Livestock and dairy producers are being hit just as hard. The cost of animal feed has surged because of grain shortages, forcing many farmers to cull herds. In some regions, milk output has fallen sharply, pushing prices up even faster than bread or potatoes. Imports from Belarus can plug some of the gap, but at a higher cost and with delivery delays. Meat is also becoming a luxury for many households, with chicken and pork prices climbing steadily. These changes in diet aren't just about taste. They mean less protein, which has real consequences for health over time. On top of all these things, the ruble's instability has made things worse, further complicating Russia's ability to feed itself. Every time the ruble dips, the price in food jumps. Why? Because Russia still depends on imported essentials like fertilizers, machinery, and even packaging. When the ruble weakens, those imports cost more. And when producers pay more, well, so do families. Suddenly, a loaf of bread isn't just breakfast, it's a luxury. If you're worried about how AI is changing everything, jobs, industries, education, even the economy, well, you're not alone. According to a Rutgers University report, 7 in 10 US workers say they're very, or somewhat, concerned about employers using AI in decision-making. 3 in 10 are worried about their job being eliminated by AI. Even experts agree. Many studies say that by the 2030s, 30% of jobs will be automated by AI. And 44% of workers replaced. That means you have to pay attention if you want to avoid becoming a victim. That's why we recently made a YouTube video that breaks down what's actually happening behind the scenes and how people are preparing, not just to survive, but to benefit from the AI revolution. And this isn't about becoming a coder or building the next ChatGPT. It's about understanding where the real leverage is as AI evolves, and how normal people are using it to build safer career paths right now. If you're feeling uncertain about the future, or you're just curious about what your options are, watch that video here on YouTube by clicking on the link in the description or on the card on your screen. Now here's where it gets worse. Leaked documents suggest the Kremlin's next move is to print more money. Well, that sounds like a quick fix, right? But it's economic gasoline on a already burning fire. More rubles chasing the same amount of goods means inflation. Fast, brutal, and unforgiving. Last year alone, Russia's money supply ballooned by nearly a quarter. Inflation is already biting at 9%. And if they hit that print button again, it'll chew through people's savings, wages, and dinner plates. This isn't just bad policy. It's a brewing crisis that Russians are being forced to endure. If the ruble keeps sliding and the presses keep rolling, the food crisis won't just deepen, it'll spiral. And for millions of Russians, that means less food, more fear, and a growing sense that the future is slipping through their fingers. Another key problem fueling the food crisis is that Russia's farms are running out of hands. Across the country, agricultural regions are facing the deepest labor shortage since World War II. Young workers are leaving rural areas, drawn to cities or pushed out by war and economic instability. What's left behind are aging farmers, understaffed operations, and fields that can't be fully planted or harvested. Without enough people to work the land, food production slows. Even more, the problem doesn't stop at the farm. Processing plants are also struggling to find workers. Dairy companies, grain mills, and vegetable packers are raising wages just to keep their doors open. But higher wages means higher costs, and those costs are passed straight to consumers. Transport and warehouse jobs are also going unfilled, causing delays and driving up logistics prices. Every missing worker adds friction to a system that's already under strain. This shortage is more than just a staffing issue. It's a valid threat to food security. When there aren't enough people to grow, process, and deliver food, shelves start to empty and prices climb. Russia is already seeing this happen. If the labor crisis continues, the food crisis will deepen. And for millions of families, that means fewer choices, tighter budgets, and a growing fear that the system just can't keep up. This is not just a possibility, cities are feeling the squeeze. In Moscow, St. Petersburg, and beyond, the ripple effects of the food crisis are hitting home. Bread, milk, potatoes, once basic staples, now strain household budgets. Families are skipping meals, stretching portions, and turning to cheaper, less nutritious options. Food banks are overwhelmed. Lines grow longer by the week, and behind each face is a quiet story of resilience and hardship. There's also a gap between what the government says and what people see. The state media often paints a picture of stability. Reports highlight successful harvests, strong partnerships, and government support, but independent sources tell a different story. They show empty shelves, rising prices and growing frustration. That disconnect makes people feel like they're being misled. And when trust breaks down, it's harder to solve problems. But the crisis doesn't hit every part of Russia the same way. In rural regions where farms are close by, you might think food would be cheaper and easier to get. When in reality, the opposite is happening. Poor road networks, failing rail connections, and fuel shortages make transporting goods from one village to another costly and unreliable. By the time food reaches these communities, prices can be even higher than in Moscow. Some villages have gone back to informal barter systems, trading potatoes for flour or eggs for diesel, because cash alone isn't enough to secure what's needed. With many living far from aid and charities failing to keep up, donations are drying up, and local support networks are stretched thin. This divide between city and countryside is widening, leaving rural families more isolated and more dependent on whatever they can grow or trade themselves. As a result of that, public frustration is simmering. Small protests are beginning to surface, not just about food, but about what its scarcity symbolizes. When shelves thin and prices climb, it shakes the foundation of everyday life. It's not just hunger, it's the erosion of dignity, the fear of not being able to feed your children, the loss of control over the most basic human needs. Beyond the obvious hunger, the crisis is starting to leave a visible mark on public health. With meat, dairy, and fresh produce priced out of reach, diets are shifting towards cheaper, less nutritious options, heavy in starch and fats. Doctors in several regions are reporting rising cases of anemia, vitamin deficiencies, and delayed growth in children. The effects aren't immediate for everyone, but over time, they weaken the workforce, increase healthcare costs, and reduce overall quality of life. These changes may be harder to reverse than price inflation, because they affect human health long after the economy recovers. The sobering thing about this entire situation is the fact that Russia has been here before. In the past, the Soviet Union spent decades battling food shortages, and the consequences were severe. From the early 1930s famine caused by forced collectivization to the rationing and long queues of the 1980s, food insecurity was a constant shadow. Central planning often failed to match supply with demand. Farmers had little incentive to produce, and distribution systems couldn't keep up. By the late Soviet years, shelves were bare, inflation was rising, and public frustration was boiling over. That history isn't just a distant memory, it's a warning. If the imbalance between agricultural output and population needs isn't addressed, the crisis will deepen. Back then, food shortages helped erode trust in the Soviet system. They weren't just about hunger, they were about dignity, control, and survival. And now, with inflation climbing and shelves thinning, the same risks are reappearing. If Russia doesn't change course, it may find itself repeating a chapter it thought it had closed. Knowing what's at stake, the government has started to respond. One of its biggest moves has been the introduction of price controls. Officials are drafting laws that would cap the cost of essentials like milk, eggs, potatoes, and sugar. The plan is to lock in prices through long-term contracts between producers and retailers, with limits on how often those prices can change. Another option being considered is a price corridor, setting minimum and maximum prices for most staple goods. The goal is to slow inflation, but producers are already pushing back, warning that fixed prices could make farming and food production unprofitable. When prices are capped, those same producers may stop selling. If that happens, supply could shrink and shortages could follow. It could also lead to black markets, a concept we're going to talk about later. To fill the gaps, Russia is also turning to imports from friendly nations. Belarus remains a key supplier of dairy and meat. China and Turkey are stepping in with vegetables, fruit, and poultry. These partnerships help ease pressure, but they come with limits. Russia's currency troubles makes imports more expensive, and transport disruptions, especially from Ukraine's attack on infrastructure, make delivery unpredictable. Still, the government sees imports as a short-term lifeline while it tries to build something more permanent. That long-term plan is called import substitution. The idea is to produce more domestically and rely less on foreign goods. However, building a self-sufficient food system takes time. It requires investment, training, and infrastructure. Russia has made some progress, especially in meat and cheese production, but the results are mixed. Many local substitutes are lower in quality or more expensive. Efforts to rebuild farming independence are still falling short, mostly because of equipment and seed shortages that haven't been resolved. The government is also cutting interest rates and offering subsidies to producers, hoping to boost output. But with inflation rising and public frustration growing, these steps may not be enough. If the balance between supply and demand isn't restored soon, the crisis could deepen, and the pressure on the state will only grow. Now, circling back to my earlier point, as food prices climb and shelves thin out, Russia's black market is quietly expanding. What started as a workaround is now becoming a parallel system. Some of the shortages aren't just about weather, war, or sanctions. They're about theft and corruption. State-subsidized goods meant to keep prices low often vanish before they reach store shelves. In some regions, local officials or transport contractors divert these products to sell them privately at higher prices. These practices fuel the black market and erode public trust, because people see the government aid being siphoned off for profit. For those already struggling to afford food, the idea that help is being stolen on the way only deepens anger and resentment. The result of these channels is a growing underground economy where staples like cheese, meat, and baby food are sold off the books, often at higher prices, but without the restrictions that come with state oversight. The rise of the black market isn't just about profit, it's about survival. While supermarkets can't stock enough, and when price controls make legal sales unprofitable, sellers look for other ways to stay afloat. Buyers, too, are adapting. Nearly 1 in 3 Russians now knowingly purchases smuggled or counterfeit goods. And it's not just about food. Cosmetics, electronics, and household items are flooding informal markets. But food is at the heart of it, and when people can't find what they need through official channels, they go where they can. Now, this shift comes with risks. Black market goods aren't regulated, and quality can vary. It also undermines legal businesses, erodes tax revenue, and distorts the real picture of supply and demand. Long-term, it pushes Russia towards a more unstable, informal economy. And if the food crisis continues, this underground system will only grow stronger, making it harder for the government to regain control and harder for families to trust what's on their table. From the outside, Russia's food crisis is no longer just a domestic issue. It's a global fault line with consequences that stretch far beyond its borders. The road ahead depends not only on internal policy and harvest yields, but also on Russia's position as one of the world's largest grain exporters. In the best-case scenario, the country manages a solid harvest season despite recent setbacks. Fuel prices stabilize, logistics improve, and imports of agricultural inputs resume through alternative trade routes. If these conditions align, Russia could maintain a respectable level of grain exports, helping to ease the pressure on global markets. Countries in Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, many of which rely heavily on Russian wheat, would benefit from steadier prices and supply continuity. This would also preserve one of Russia's key sources of foreign revenue, which brought in billions annually before the crisis. However, the worst-case scenario is already unfolding in parts of the country. Grain production has dropped sharply due to poor weather, seed shortages, and equipment constraints. Export volumes are falling fast. And if this trend continues, Russia could lose its standing as a top global supplier. That would send shockwaves through international markets. Countries dependent on Russian grain could face sudden price spikes and supply disruptions. The collapse of cooperative export agreements and the ongoing war have already strained global food security. If Russia's output continues to decline and Ukraine's exports remain constrained, the world could see a repeat of the grain panic that followed earlier conflicts, only this time with fewer safety nets. But the more likely outcome lies somewhere in between the two. Domestic prices in Russia remain high, and food availability is uneven. Public frustration simmers, especially in regions where subsidies and imports fail to reach. Globally, grain prices stay elevated. They may not reach crisis levels, but they remain high enough to strain budgets in vulnerable countries. Russia continues to export, though at reduced volumes and with frequent delays. Speculation and financial hedging in global markets add volatility, making it harder for poorer nations to plan and purchase grain. The geopolitical use of food as leverage remains a troubling reality, and the uncertainty surrounding Russia's agricultural output continues to destabilize international trade. This crisis is about more than potatoes or bread. It's about the stability of daily life in Russia and the ripple effects across continents. Food inflation is deeply entangled with war, sanctions, and global trade dynamics. It is shaped by decisions made in Moscow, Brussels, and even Washington, and felt in kitchens, from Harare to Cairo. Russia's grain exports are not just a domestic asset. They are a global lifeline. When they falter, the consequences are felt far beyond their borders. Historically, food has been a catalyst for change in Russia. Bread and potatoes have fueled more than just stomachs. They have fueled revolutions and marked moments when the social contract broke down. Whether today's crisis sparks real transformation depends on what happens next. If the government acts decisively, there is a chance to stabilize both domestic and global markets. If it fails, the fallout could be severe, and not just for Russians. For many families, this crisis is not political. It is personal. It is the mother in Kazan skipping dinner so her children can eat. It is the pensioner in Volgograd choosing between groceries and medicine. It is the farmer in Krasnodar watching grain rot in silos because there is no fuel to move it. These stories don't make headlines, but they define the moment. They remind us that behind every ton of grain, every price index, and every export figure, lives are being reshaped by the cost of food.